Are most construction executives, CEOs, paying enough attention to technology? Yes or no?
Yes, but not the right thing.
Wow.
The idea of thinking that I'm going to change the business model in the midst of the greatest performing years we've ever had is unimaginable. It's unthinkable, but it's not optional. If you hire a project manager and they say, well, I've never really, you know, applied it or even thought about applying it at work, it's like, you know, that level of thinking. Um, we want people coming in thinking, hey, how can this improve the business? We're not asking them to understand how to jump into Claude and create an agent, right? But we do want the people who have the attitude and aptitude to say, yep, I see AI not as a tool but as a teammate.
The largest general contractor in the United States does about $30 billion a year in revenue. Apple makes that company's entire annual profit in just 48 hours. Carl McFarland ran the maths, and it changed how he thinks about everything. Carl spent 31 years in construction. He started as an intern on Coors Field Stadium in Denver, and today he's president of Big D Construction Southwest, part of a nearly $3 billion group. And he's convinced the business model that kept our industry running is about to become unrecognizable. In this episode, Carl explains why he'd never hire a PM who hasn't used AI, why the best builder on your team might make the worst leader, why housing cost data since 1950 should make every construction professional uncomfortable, and why no single firm can solve what's coming alone. When I asked him what keeps him up at night, he compared it to running on a treadmill at 12 miles an hour. That's elite marathon pace every single day. And when I asked how you sustain that, he said, I cannot do it on my own. This is Bricks and Bytes, and this is Carl McFarland. All right, Carl. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Let's do this quick fire round then. So, number one, has AI changed how you run your business day to day?
Absolutely yes, without question.
Oh, love it. Is modular construction over or underhyped?
Misunderstood.
Ooh, nice. Number four is, are most construction executives, CEOs, paying enough attention to technology? Yes or no?
Yes, but not the right things.
Wow. Okay. Is number five, is construction harder to lead now than it was 20 years ago?
No, I think the requirements have just changed.
What keeps you up at night? Work related.
Yeah, it it's the same thing that's really kept me up for the latter half of my career, but now with this massive innovation, it has accelerated it to the point where you almost feel like you're catching your breath because, and I say that because again, and people have talked about this before, if you really understand where the change is occurring, it's the pace, right? It's the pace. If you're a runner and you run a 10-minute mile and you realize, okay, yep, I know what that speed is, and then you go to the gym and I'm using our wonderful uh, analogy of you have to run twice as fast today as you normally are used to running, right? So get on a
Mhm.
treadmill and go 12 miles an hour and see how long you can run at 12 miles an hour, which is an elite marathoner, right? Sub 5 minute mile,
Mhm.
right? And most people don't understand what it takes to run a sub 5 minute mile or what 12 miles an hour on a treadmill feels like. And that's what I feel like every single day coming into work, thinking about where the business is headed.
Wow. Interesting. So how can you achieve that sub 5 minute mile?
Yeah, I can't do it on my own. So I've got to figure out another strategy because it's bigger than me. I'm not that elite. So I have to figure out, hey, there's gotta be another way.
Mm, interesting. Okay, last one then. Um, what do you think is the biggest, or maybe you give us a bit of a hint there, but what do you think is the biggest mistake a construction exec could make right now in the current landscape we find ourselves in?
That the existing business model is going to remain the same, and that
Hmm.
that model is not changing, and that you're simply going to apply the technology in a way that helps you improve the existing model.
In construction, precision matters. Every budget line, every schedule, every document. But too often, project data is scattered across tools and departments, creating risky silos. That's where ArcDesk comes in. ArcDesk is the all in one construction management platform designed to connect your entire project operation, from opportunity through to tender, all the way to handover. With real time dashboards, cost control, scheduling, procurement, and document management in one place, ArcDesk gives you complete visibility and control. Trusted by contractors, subcontractors, and asset owners worldwide, ArcDesk has powered landmark projects from shopping centres to Europe's tallest buildings. If you're ready to reduce risk, protect your margins, and deliver projects with confidence, discover ArcDesk today. Visit arcdesk.com, that's ARCH desk.com, and see how leading firms are building smarter with ArcDesk. Major construction projects are complex, and delivery leaders know that things rarely go to plan. The problem is that most teams don't see what's slipping or why until it's too late. The best construction leaders know that in order to deliver on schedule, everyone needs to be planning together, committing to targets, and tracking performance every day. By bringing look aheads, weekly work plans, visual staging diagrams, and daily activity briefings into one multiplayer platform, Aphex gives the world's leading projects a single place to plan and coordinate their work. Join the largest contractors across Europe, the UK, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. Learn more at aphex.co. That's aphex.co. One poorly managed incident. That's all it takes to demolish the entire profit on your project. And right now, the only thing standing between you and that disaster is your superintendent, showing up at 3 a.m., buried in paperwork before the day's even started. That's why Breadcrumb exists. Not to add more technology to the job site, but to give the foreman, the supers, and the crews running it tools that work the way they do. Safety plans signed off, orientations completed on any phone in any language, permits processed without the back and forth, no paper, no chasing signatures, all synced directly into Procore. With OSHA penalties reaching into the tens of thousands, that kind of oversight isn't just a nice to have, it's everything. Over 1 million workers across 50,000 projects globally have Breadcrumb in their pocket. Book a demo at breadcrumb.co. That's breadcrumb.co. Links in the show notes. When we first spoke, you described this concept to me of this of the construction industry being in its blockbuster video moment. So hopefully you remember the conversation. Can you unpack that? Just unpack that for us.
Yeah, yeah. When you think about where Blockbuster was in I think it was 96, you'll have to fact check me there, but, they
Uh-huh.
were at the heights of their business, right? And, I believe that was the year somewhere around there where Netflix approached them. I think they were still kind of maybe even in the DVD mode at the time, but could see out over the landscape that streaming was the future. And, you know, where I think our business is, we're right there in that Blockbuster moment. I think you had a pod recently where one of your guests talked about there are now two markets in the industry. There's the AI infrastructure market and everything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in like this almost intoxicated frenzy if you're in the AI infrastructure market, where margins are high, top line revenue growth is exploding even beyond your own capacity. And there's almost this euphoria out there, right? And it's in a time where underneath you, the entire foundation of how the business model works has the ability to change while you're in this euphoria of heightened profitability, right? And that's where I think Blockbuster was. They were in this just unbelievable state of being, marketing, advertising. There was the Blockbuster Bowl and things like that. And along comes this entity that says, "Hey, the business model's changing." And it's like, well, I don't have time for that because my business model is working great. So by the time I think Netflix figured it out, or I'm sorry, by the time Blockbuster figured it out, I mean, and I'm not saying they thought this, but I think this is what our industry is thinking just out of
Mm.
natural instinct. Okay, how about we rent VHS tapes online? The customer drives to the store, takes it home, watches it, and we can still benefit from late fees, right? And so now all of a sudden, the idea of applying that technology to the existing system, Netflix is saying, hey, the stores are going away, the VHS tape's going away. Streaming is going to change all of that. It's going to change advertising. It's going to change everything about the current business model and where income gets generated. There will be no more late fees because there is no more VHS tapes.
Uh-huh.
And it's an analogy that seems almost cliche, and I sometimes resist using it, but it's so identifiable, right? And that is the single most difficult thing that I believe every industry leader is facing, is because you have to run the current business model because it keeps the lights on and it makes you profitable. Now, if you're in that AI infrastructure space, you're doubling down on it because it's the most profitable and the highest
Mm.
numbers your organization has ever hit. So the idea of thinking that I'm going to change the business model in the midst of the greatest performing years we've ever had is unimaginable. It's unthinkable, but it's not optional.
Mm.
Like, and that's why you have to look at Blockbuster. You have to look at other companies, whether it was BlackBerry or otherwise, going, wait a minute, what is over the horizon? And that horizon is no longer 10 years. It's it's months sometimes. It's really trying to understand that. And that is incredibly difficult to do.
Mm. Yeah, I really do love the analogy. And I just recalled when you were explaining that I explained to you that when we first started doing Bricks and Bytes 4 or so years ago, we heard this Blockbuster analogy, like, and not in the way you described it, but we spoke about it, went quiet for a while, and then we're back here saying it again, which highlights to me the fact that like something really is happening now, and we're really starting to see some technological shift or some shift in the thinking and the leaders that are leading our industry now. Um, as it relates to the acceleration, particularly of technology and business models, and as construction companies rethink how they are going to remain competitive in the near future. Would you say that that this you're thinking now? Is there one particular trigger, i.e., AI, which has like got you thinking like this, or are there some other factors that have like got you to this kind of point where things are now really starting to change and accelerate?
Yeah, I've always kind of thought this way because if you look at the business, it's incredibly fragmented, right? People talk about that all the time. Look at the amount of players in our space, and then when you look at the top performing, you know, firms across the world, or even in the U.S., right? Let's say you take somebody who's 30, even 20 to 30 billion dollars a year, um, and you take that net income, right? We were just talking about it the other day. Like, even if you gave a generous net income on 30 billion, you know, Apple makes that in 48 hours.
Mm, hmm.
Put that into context, right? They
Yeah,
make the entire profit of a 25 to 30 billion dollar a year company
it's
in
crazy.
40 hours. And fact check that, because I ran the math a couple times because I didn't believe it. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And this was a few years ago when I think they recorded like 99 billion in income. Well,
Uh-huh.
so when you look at our business and you really just kind of talk through the entire process of construction for separate designer, owner, um, you know, all these different players,
Mm.
it almost seems somewhat irrational today. And now, with the advent of more and more innovation and technology around our landscape, it's kind of exposing our weaknesses even more, right? And hopefully it stitch it together. Meaning, when you see the vertically integrated firms, you realize what they're doing. I mean, even Elon came out and said, "Hey, there's some fragmentation in the computer chip fabrication process, and I'm going to vertically integrate all that so I can iterate faster." Right?
Mm,
Your podcast with QB had a chance to talk to them as well after that. So thanks for the reference there. And
mm,
they talk about that same kind of Tesla innovation and iteration, right? Um, and that can't exist in our fragmented, siloed industry. So I think what happens, at least for me, is I used to think that that was the only way that we were going to solve this complicated Rubik's cube, is to be vertically integrated. And it may be, but now I'm starting to think, wait a minute, does technology allow you to create vertical integration and maintain a level of profitability that would not require a firm to be fully vertically integrated in house? In other words, can you still have some of our connected pieces, but today's technology now optimizes the back end and the efficiency and the data sharing to where you can almost simulate vertical integration?
mm-hmm,
But you have to rethink your 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 business model from a profitability, from your overhead ratios, your corporate services allocation, and all these other things that make that up. It's a complete rethink of your P&L, in my
mm.
opinion. And
Yeah,
that,
no,
it
go on,
sounds
Karen.
abstract a little bit, but vertically integrating a firm, I mean, you talk to Goldback, you don't do that in 12 months.
70 years, I
The,
think they were.
the culture alone kills it. So, can you take technology and vertically integrate? And I've always thought, and I'll throw this out there because someone else has already thought about it. Is, can you go to partners within the industry, create a consortium, and say, okay, we're going to create this new co, and before we do that, we need to have buy-in from each of those stakeholders that you're willing to rethink the business model of this new co. It's off balance sheet. It's going to require a whole different way of leadership thinking.
Mm,
Have to start with the economics a little bit, right? I mean, because if their culture is not right, they're not at the table, right? So I'm not saying skip the culture piece as a business leader, because you have to have that
mm,
mindset. So that's just the entry fee. But then you got to really get your head around, okay, what's this profit model look like? And what are the ROIs that are going to drive that? Because it's not going to be the same. And then how do we leverage technology to really go down that road? And I think AI today could enable that to scale faster, so that you don't have to be Amazon and wait for that profitability and go to the public market and do it over, call it, 20 years.
mm,
Most people don't realize that Amazon was incorporated in 95 and went public in 97, right? They think Amazon showed up in the mid 2000s, right? And
mm,
it's like,
mm,
oh, it's long before that, right? So our industry can't sustain that. And we don't really understand how to do that in the public market. At least in the US, there's not a lot of that happening. So that's my thought is, hey, how do we create a group of like minded entities across that supply chain from end to end? And instead of being the Katera model where you just go out and, you know, acquire it all and say everybody's going to behave the same way, and we're going to take on all of this debt and spend all this cash, you really just bring like-minded stakeholders in and say, okay, here's the rethink.
mm-hmm.
And that's, we're trying to do that on a small scale, but then expand that a little bit.
Mm. Yeah, when you were explaining that, it got me thinking really about, yeah, and how in practice it can be done. Obviously, like, I don't think anyone really knows the answer, but you have to do something. You have to keep moving towards the goal. Do you think, like, what we see in the technology world is, like, obviously you have large companies, Procore, Autodesk, and others, and their strategy to implement something similar to what you're describing is to acquire faster moving, smaller startups who can build technology at a quicker speed, who have smaller teams, are more nimble, and can do things very quickly. Like, what you're describing is obviously a major change, and I don't know the exact employee count at Big D, but I can imagine it's significantly more than perhaps a new player who comes onto the market with this new innovative construction idea who could potentially disrupt the entire business model. So the point I'm trying to make is, does it make sense for this to be built within, like a company like Big D or others? Or does it make sense for someone like Big D or others to actually find a company that's already doing this, acquire them, and then implement their process and business model and technology within the company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the acquisition piece is very difficult because I think of it like if you were to acquire that smaller firm and that incubator thinking into the innovation curve of a large firm that has 1,000 plus employees. Let's just say that's the benchmark of the big firm, 1,000 plus.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the ocean, and the little firm is that drop of red food coloring, and the culture just kills it. I mean,
yeah,
that's my opinion. It's because um, it's just the laws of the innovation curve, right? The innovators, early adopters, majority, and the laggards. The big firm has that natural distribution, and the majority of the firm is in the you know majority and the laggard. They still don't have enough innovators to really push that forward, maybe, but that's just my theory. It might work. I think the piece that we have seen from a cultural standpoint is stay on the side of the innovators and early adopters only, even in your own organization,
mm,
especially now, right? With this innovation, because there's so much fear surrounding it, right? So the majority and the laggards, right? I mean, the fear factor is exponentially higher than the internet. It is like s- strikes fear in a lot more people, in my opinion, of the majority and the laggards. Like, oh my gosh, right? Especially
yeah.
just
I would
recent.
agree.
So I think you have to stay on the innovator and early adopter to, what was the book? Crossing the Chasm, right? I
Hmm.
mean, that chasm is huge now to get the majority to buy in on true transformation. And, I think a lot of it comes down to, having discussion as executive leaders about, hey, how does the financial business model change? Right. It's just really, you have to have that tough discussion. And it starts to fall apart if your return isn't near term, right? In your
Hmm.
long term horizon. There are innovators out there for sure that are doing this. There's no question. But it's really hard to say, gosh, I don't know how much we would have to spend
Mm.
to start seeing significant results, right? We're struggling, I think, as an industry just to do that with our little, beta tests on where to apply AI in the existing process, right? How much time are we going to spend on that? Let alone saying, okay, let's go reinvent the business model. Right now, you're talking about big numbers,
Yeah.
and how long are we willing to try that at X expense before we pull the plug on it and say, okay, that didn't work, or it did work, and we see now a future on the other side of that, and we're willing to invest 4 or 5 more years, right? That's why it's
That's a
you know
hard sell.
the gold deck uh, pod like 3 times. just because every time I listen, I go, "Oh, yeah,
Oh,
totally
wow.
see
Nice.
where they're coming from." And that's where when you think about it through the lens of the business itself, the the game gets hard because you can't run in this loss like an Amazon for 20 years and say, "Yeah, on the other side of this is complete world domination." Right? Nobody has that balance sheet in our industry to do that.
Yeah. That's a great way to think. Plus, like, yeah, also on the little margins that we operate in this industry, like, yeah, you can imagine going to main shareholders and boards and telling them you're going to run this multi-billion-dollar experiment. It might work.
Well, listen, I mean, you read the letter to shareholders from Jeff Bezos, 1997. You know,
Okay.
it is great. I still have it. I read it every so often, but he basically says that. He
Mm.
goes, "I have clarity in my vision, basically, but it may not work,
Yeah. Love it.
right? And oh, by the way, it's going to take a while for this to mature. So if you think tomorrow you're going to get returns, this business isn't for you." And I'm completely summarizing it because it's one of the greatest, in my opinion, letters to shareholders.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show. Um, I wanted to follow up on something that you said when I asked the quick fire questions, which was about whether construction CEOs are paying enough attention to technology. And your answer was yes, but not the right thing. Can you expand on that? What are they focusing on, and why do you, in your opinion, think that this is wrong, and what should they do?
Yeah, and this is just my opinion only from my own mistakes and maybe some not mistakes, but just even oversights. Like, oh, I thought this, and it really seems to be going in this direction. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, the and it goes back to the business model itself. AI being applied to our business, and I think even Dustin talked about this a little bit, right? Right? Are you going to invest a whole bunch of things in quantity takeoff because, you know, is that going to be kind of displaced by design for manufacturing and assembly where the bill of materials from the design just simply goes right to the machine that produces it, right? So the whole quantity takeoff is already done, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So when I think of business leaders, there's my initial reaction, and it's more because I've always thought like an innovator, but there are some firms that are thinking, hey, let's, try some things maybe here and there, right? Turn on Copilot for a select few, but let's just kind of hang tight and see how this thing plays out at a larger scale. So let's invest a little bit, right? And I think that's a conservative approach, right? Try something here, something there. And I think a lot of that is happening now. But really, it goes back to what we spoke about earlier. I believe there needs to be this consortium of business leaders, even in the same vertical space, whether it's GCs or trade partners, where we're coming together to say, how do we rethink the industry and what regulations and what things have to change, right? I think the larger tech companies do a better job of that. And I'm not saying we're going to turn into a bunch of lobbyists in Congress, but there's this is a like I said, a much bigger picture than any one of us. And if I could summarize the rethink for me was I thought, okay, I need to attack this in my business unit or my organization. And we're going to go about it through my lens of thinking. And it's so much bigger than me. It's so much bigger than any one firm that the rethink is just that. Not a single one of us has the intellectual combined with the financial capital to solve and get on the other side of this wave on our own. And that's probably a bold and maybe arrogant and dismissive statement. But when you think about the scale and the size, intellectual, yes. Combined with financial capital to solve this, oof, man. Look at what's happening in the chip space and all the right. You're looking at numbers that just seem unimaginable to us, right? Like we're seeing these numbers fly around, and it almost seems like we're hallucinating because
Mm-hmm.
they're so big. And I'm not saying that's the kind of capital investment, but there's a complete rethink, and that's where we as leaders have to stop and think, what does that look like and who can help me get there?
Mm.
And it sounds abstract, but it's like we can't do it on our own. We think, all right, we're GC number X and the largest leader out there. We'll just, to your point, we'll acquire this, we'll do that, and boom, problem solved. We're going to be, you know, gold back combined with Google overnight, right? And it's just, yeah,
Yeah, I think that there are more smarter people now looking at the industry coming into it from other industries. But to the point that you make, and what I wanted to say was that you mentioned about the financial capital and the intellect. And if you look at other industries and how they typically innovate, they have a huge checkbook, like you say, like the hundreds of billions, the hundreds of billions, but billions going in, 100 millions and billions, and they have the expertise. So maybe in some respects, the expertise element of the equation within the construction industry is starting to creep in. Um, the question is like, yeah, where does the capital come from? I don't know the answer, honestly.
yeah, a couple of things. I think that's where I feel like when you think about maybe some companies that have leveraged supplier relationships to help subsidize that capital investment. And what do I mean by that? Like if you take the like in the prefab business, I had the opportunity to sit on a board for a panelization prefab company years ago, and one thing I learned was that these suppliers now are starting to think about how to control price to market by leveraging technology. So, for example, think about the automotive industry, right? Internal combustion engine cars in the United States cannot be sold directly to consumers because of some laws back in the Henry Ford days. But electric vehicles can be sold direct to consumer, right?
Wow.
There's regulations today, existing laws that don't allow that. Is it possible now? Used cars, different, just new cars for internal combustion engine, because otherwise we'd all go to that model, because who in the United States for sure loves walking into a dealership to buy a new car? I've not met one person who enjoys that experience either. Okay. And being sold by a salesperson who wants to sell you the extended warranty, and you're like,
Hey.
bought a new car, really? So, but we're seeing that where, in the pandemic, Ford and a lot of other firms or a lot of other OEMs said, hey, you guys are price gouging during the pandemic, right? And all of those overinflated prices because, chips weren't getting to the cars. And so, you had a manufacturer suggested retail price of a Ford F-150 at 40,000, and they were selling them at the dealer for 75, right? And it was hurting the brand. So what we are seeing in certain spaces within the construction industry who doesn't have those impose regulations. The suppliers are using technology to connect to the consumers, especially prefabricators and otherwise, and selling direct to them and creating a go to market strategy that allows them to get a little bit closer to direct to consumer. And that model is driven a lot by data, right?
Mm,
And that's a very hard concept for our industry to understand. I was in a meeting with we have this, and I won't get into the details of who,
mm,
but we have this another consortium that we put together in the prefab modular space, and we brought in our technology platform partner, and they said, "Hey, we think we can buy this mechanical equipment at a lower cost than you." And they were like, "No, I don't think so." And so that fabricator said, "Well, we buy based on volume." And our technology partner said, "Well, yeah, we can beat those prices." And the
mhm,
look on the traditional construction side was like, "How is that possible? Why we buy a million of these, you buy 100?
mhm.
How is that possible?" And they said, "We're selling data to them, and that data has value." So
Wow.
think about, and I don't know if the UK had this, but in the US we had the Nielsen ratings, and the Nielsen ratings basically told you as like our major broadcasting channels. Like if I tell my 18-year-old son ABC, CBS, NBC, he's like, "What are you talking about? Those are our major broadcasters." And
Yeah.
they use the Nielsen ratings. And you could say, here is how many people watched the Super Bowl. You couldn't say how many people, you could say how many households and approximate the people, because it was a coax cable that would tell you
Uh-huh.
very limited about who the viewership was. But then along comes streaming, and along comes YouTube, and now and all these other platforms. And now instead of just saying, here's how many households watch the Super Bowl, you're saying, here's how many people streamed the Super Bowl, how much of the Super Bowl they watched. Did they
Mhm.
just watch halftime? Did they only watch the first half? Here's the
Mm,
25 demographic. Here's all this other information, right? Well, the smart suppliers in our industry are starting to figure that out. They're like, if I can use a platform to go to market to collect that kind of data that is very specific to the user that's operating my mechanical equipment and how long and all those other things, that has tremendous value. And we're willing to discount that price, especially if we can skip some layers. So there's that whole rethink happening on that end of the business that is changing the way you look at supply chain, because now we value data almost over volume
mhm.
in
Yeah, there's a new value lever or currency that's being traded here, which is not financial. It's a different thing, i.e., data. Interesting. And then ultimately, the value in the data. I did read something which made me laugh. Is uh, it's only useful for advertisers. So the whole world is just becoming uh, an advertising industry. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think look at a mechanical company. If they know more about, and take Tesla for example, um, the amount of information that they're able to collect to iterate on improving the product, right? So I think there's advertising, but what I think in our industry is really driving that data collection is product optimization, efficiency, improvement. Because, yeah, they're not selling to the general consumer, right? And so they want a competitive advantage. How do I make my product better? And, just like Tesla, like over the air updates
Mhm.
changed
Mm.
the automotive industry's thinking. Like every 2 weeks on my Model Y,
Mhm.
it's one improvement after the other,
Yeah,
right?
nice. Yeah.
So I think these OEMs in the construction industry, if you use that term, are saying, "Wow, we can have accelerate our research and development at a different pace if we have that kind of granular data that we are collecting ourselves directly, and it gives us a competitive advantage over others," right? So it becomes more R&D related, product improvement, and building your moat through that data, and it's allowing them to even bypass some of the distributors.
Hmm.
So,
Fascinating. Yeah. Well, Carl, I want to change the direction slightly and just talk about your experience of in the construction industry. So, and then what I'll do is I'll loop back around to some of the questions that you asked at the start, and maybe get a bit more explanation on some of your responses there. But so you've been in construction industry 31 years, right?
yeah, yeah, or maybe more. Let's see. I started my internship with a Mortenson Bart Mallow joint venture, and this will date
Nice.
me on Coors Field Stadium in Denver for the Colorado Rockies in Major League Baseball. And I will credit Jim Diekman, who was my professor at the University of Colorado when I was in engineering school, introduced me to someone I have a tremendous amount of respect for, Robert Rayborn. And I think Jim almost felt bad for me because I was not the greatest academic student in the engineering school. In fact, I may have the lowest GPA to ever graduate. Uh,
That's an
I,
achievement.
yeah, my 18-year-old asked me to hey Dad, let's check out your transcripts, and I'm like, oh, so I went and downloaded them, and I was like, wow, I did have to take calculus 2 3 times. That's so pretty humbling in front of your 18-year-old to go,
Oh
wow.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Long story short, yeah, I mean, I was blessed in every aspect of my career from day one, right? You get somebody who cares enough to give this kid who's playing club baseball at Colorado because we didn't have a you know a official program, and struggling with grades and say, hey, I'm going to introduce you to the marquee project in your state right now, and introduce me to one of the greatest, if not the greatest, stadium builder that I have ever met in Robert Raybon. And, kind of for me, the rest is history, right? To travel around for the first half of my career doing iconic, stadium projects and being a kid who loved sports and loved to build.
Mm,
It was just almost a fantasy, right? This fairy tale. But along the way, I learned from some of the, you know, greatest, and these are like unbelievable people that are now either leaders or have already sunset their careers. And, I couldn't have asked for more for sure.
yeah, very cool. Over the years, what's some of the lessons that you have learned for about running a profitable construction business?
Yeah. I think the most valuable is you have to understand the core fundamentals of the building process, right? Doesn't mean you have to know every single detail, but you have to have that interest in understanding the business process. And then here's where I think the toughest part, when I look at building the people and the teams and the relationships that build the business, there is the single most difficult part is transitioning people from being builders of the building to builders of people and teams to builders of the business. Those
Hmm.
last few changes are are for me as a leader, um, from a building the business. If we just take the strategic side of it out of the way and the tactical execution, is making that shift with your team to go, okay, I'm no longer building buildings, I'm building people and teams. And now I have to apply that to building a business. And that's incredibly difficult, but I think it's the most important fundamental aspect of our business. And in our business, we value technical competency, right? How great of a builder do you have? And you need those great builders, 100%. Um, but not every great builder makes a great leader. And that's hard to say, but I'll give you an example. For me, and now that NBA basketball is becoming more global, it might be more relatable, but
Mm,
Michael Jordan is the GOAT, in my opinion, of
mm-hmm.
NBA basketball. But he would not have made a great head coach,
Mm,
just simply put. And is there anything wrong with that? I think if you ask anybody that has any, love for the game of sports at all, and you say, would you love to be Michael Jordan? They would say, oh, absolutely. But not in the context of me that I can't be a business leader and coach and build a business. No, you can be the greatest of all time at this, being a builder. And then it's like, oh, wait, no, So when I look at that aspect, that is by far the hardest thing to do is building a buildings to building a people, teams, and a business.
yeah. Love it. Yeah, but I think people will also relate, by the way, to the Michael Jordan analogy, that example that you use, because over here in the UK, Premier League football, soccer, as you guys would call it, even like European, the best players, I can't think of right now, but I can't think of a player who was like world class, who's also now a world class manager. You'll find that the managers of the teams were like good players, like good. They were a team member. Yeah, they played well in the team. They were not like someone who has made the record books or done this tremendous, remarkable thing. So that's an interesting like thing to think about. Yeah, so it's a skill set. Yeah, and maybe there are some clues there in that some of it is quite natural to come to people. It's not something that obviously you can learn skills and techniques, but a lot of it, yeah, is within your nature as a person to be able to transfer from building projects, building teams, and then building businesses. Do you have any like do you at Big T put people through anything to help with this, or do you have any kind of um, theory or methods or practices that you personally preach on this, like getting people through that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we all struggle with this. I talk to other leaders, and we sometimes commiserate over this dilemma, right? Because you have some builders that may have kind of got through the system and are now in those leadership roles, but now you've got to make those changes, right? Because the business is pivoting, and you know that really hurts the business if you don't really understand who this person is and how they operate. I mean, it's really easy in sports to understand who should be in which position because, in the States, right, you put Tom Brady at left tackle, greatest quarterback of all time. But if you put him in left tackle in
Hmm.
2 plays, you're going to go, oh my gosh, I feel bad for him. Right.
Hmm.
So, but we put a lot of those builders in that role of leadership, and they struggle and they struggle and they struggle for not just months, but years. So, um, I think we are trying better to leverage the tools of today and AI with the personality profiles to really
Mm.
understand who they are and what drives and motivates them. And when you work with somebody long enough, you pick up on that, right? But when you're trying to build teams quickly, you need to make that assessment very quickly and
Hmm.
understand, okay, this is who this person is. And we're not pigeonholing them. It gives us some quicker insights into, okay, here's how we're going to have to develop this person from a leadership standpoint to get them to that next level, right? But the first thing you have to identify is that what they really want to do? Do they really want to be that coach? Do they really want to, or do they just want to be the best in that position, in that role? So AI has really helped us with that because we've always done those personality profiles and strength finder, but it's hard to assimilate all of that.
Hmm.
And it's helped us for sure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, putting people through the tests, through those tests, and then using AI to give you an insight that you just was not available to you before about where these people would be best positioned. And it also, I suppose, it also understands like your organizer, the AI. Understands like the makeup of the organization, the people within it as well. Which again, like for a human to do something like that, is like extreme amounts of work and connecting the dots as well. Like you have to be very intellectually pretty smart to be able to do something like that. So this is a very incredible unlock. That you are the one of the first people that I've ever spoken to about this. So that's fascinating. Um, Carl, I guess we have 10 or so minutes to go. I did see a question here that I wanted to ask you about. Um, can you tell us about when we spoke about before? You said something about operations. If get the operations right and the sales take care of themselves. Was it like that? Did I butcher your saying?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, you have to sell work, period. I mean, no business exists without sales.
Of course.
Um, there's no question.
Hmm.
It's the I don't think it's a chicken and the egg story. With zero sales, there is no business, right? So, um, but you have to have clarity around how that business executes and what it delivers, right? In my opinion. So even before you make your first ever sale, that clarity has to be, you know, unmatched, ready to execute, and be able to clearly articulate that to whoever you're selling to, right? And I think the whole sales model, and this may be going a little bit off tangent of what your question is. I think the sales model is also starting to change a little bit. What I mean by that is, as a general contractor, for example, we have spent our career selling us. Okay, we build buildings, but that's really we're a service provider. Yes,
Hmm.
we sell perform a few things, but ultimately we're selling a service. But I think that's changing because I think when you look at, and I don't know if it was the McKinsey report in 2020 when they talked about right after COVID, I think it got published on this whole idea of the industrialization of our industry
Hmm.
happening. Like, and so instead of taking the market and going to the market for customers and then bringing it to a product concept with your design and construction team, we're going to have to think about how do we bring the product to the market. And there are some nuances into that. But for me, I think we're going to have to do that. And there are certain spaces like housing. I think we talked about that a little bit. Um, is that housing is becoming unaffordable, right? We did a little research here in the states and said from 1950 till today, food as a percentage of household income has been cut in half,
Hmm.
right? Farming has been industrialized, albeit there's subsidies, right? Because it's a core fundamental function of human existence, right?
Hmm.
Make sure you don't have starvation. We looked at transportation. Transportation over that 75-year period has basically stayed flat as a percentage of household income. But in the States, housing has gone up 10%, almost actually, it's almost about 13%, I believe,
Hmm.
of household income. So that's just unsustainable. And a large portion of that increase has come in the last 25 years. So that curve is kind of steepening. So
Hmm.
if we're really true to ourselves, we're thinking, how do we change this cycle? Um, and I think we're going to have to start looking at solutions like that and say, how do we as a collective design, engineering, everything, and this goes back to the gold deck model, how do we bring a product to the market with some variability in architectural design and interest, but ultimately, you know, we're going to have to rethink those basic human needs that way. And in theory, it sounds great. In practice, I go back to, once again, as you're an executive leader, it's okay, how do you make the financial economics work?
Hmm. Yeah. Ultimate question.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where, as a leader in the industry, um, we are all forced to have that conversation. You can't let it get in the way of ideation, but once you have a theory and you want to put it into practice, as an executive responsible for a P&L, and you're going to ask your C-suite for your, next year's funding or the next 5 years, you can't just go in there and explain theoretical ideas about, "Hey, let's try this."
I promise you
Right?
it's gonna work.
Yeah, right, right, and that's what I think, we're facing right now, is that is that's the real dilemma, is what are we willing to risk in our own business units, on our own organizations, with the type margins that we have. That's why I think the collective is really
Mm,
the longer term answer.
Call to action for the collective. Um, okay, 5 or so minutes.
Yeah,
I asked you at the start, Carl, about the exact question was, would you hire a project manager today who can't use AI tools? And you said no.
yeah. I
Tell
mean,
us more.
it, it's just the basic idea of using it is simple. Like, if you hire a project manager and they say, "Well, I've never really, you know, applied it or even thought about applying it at work." It's like, you know, that level of thinking. Um, we want people coming in thinking, "Hey, how can this improve the business?" I've seen how it helps me personally. We're not asking them to understand how to jump into Claude and create an agent, right? I mean, that's not the expectation. But I will tell you, it seems like the ops tech person that we have on our team here in our regional business is saying it's becoming easier and easier to do that. And so it will become part of, I think, the tool in the toolbox for the average project manager
Hmm.
soon enough. We haven't set that bar that high, but we do want the people who have the attitude and aptitude to say, "Yep, I see AI not as a tool, but as a teammate."
Hmm.
Right? We're trying to create that mindset because firms have already talked about that. So, yeah, I think it's important that you're bringing people who are saying, "Yeah, I want to figure out how to leverage that because there's value in it for me to be more efficient, right? To be more understanding." We do this with our intern class. Every time they come in, we have them present at, at various stages throughout their internship. But one of those is, okay, where is AI adding value to you in your day, right? And one of the things that we see that comes up with the interns all the time is just their ability to go into meetings or go into a discussion with more knowledge, right? Because usually they would sit in a meeting and hear 50 acronyms, and if you could put a little bubble over their head, it would not look anything like what's being discussed, right?
Hmm.
So it really helps them um, have more valued and engaging conversations because they at least understand the basic concepts of what's being talked about.
Mm. Yeah, exciting times, eh? Um, Do you have like a quick example maybe of like some use case of AI that you've experienced internally that you can share? Obviously, appreciate some might be
Yeah,
confidential.
yeah.
So.
I mean, we're not, like, doing anything that anybody else hasn't already done.
Hmm.
I think the challenge we have right now is we're looking at applying it in 2 major buckets. One is the efficiency bucket, and then there's the risk mitigation bucket. And I feel like listening to tech leaders and industry leaders that those 2 buckets serve 2 different purposes right now. The efficiency bucket serves the buy-in and crossing the chasm, right? Getting your early adopters on board and then convincing the majority, hey, this is a good thing. It's going to make me more efficient. It's going to make my life better. So we're not looking at the efficiency bucket as changing like it this very moment. It will change the P&L because it will allow those people to scale to a level that allows the return per person per month to go way up. But when we look at the other piece, which is how do we apply AI to risk mitigation, the return today, I think, is a lot higher. So we just created, um, not too long ago, an agent in our business unit that basically does a collection of the monthly review metrics on a project and then gives those fact based metrics to the project manager with some insights. Very limited. We've tried to keep the insights and we're watching them closely, human in the loop. But that kind of risk mitigation will have returns that are 10x the efficiency, right? The amount of time it took that PM to put that report together may have taken 3 hours. It does it in a few seconds, but it's not the 3 hours. It's the fact that the system saw something that maybe she didn't see
Mm-hmm.
PM. And so she now is like, oh, wait, I got to rethink that. And that's got a six-figure number attached to it, right?
Hmm.
So we're trying what we've been kind of guided towards is let's plan these 2 buckets, and here's what the purpose of those buckets are to get clarity around that and limit it. Don't be stuck in this, you know, pilot purgatory, if you will.
Mm. Very cool.
So,
Yeah, nice. Okay, Carl. Very last one. Someone who's listened to this, what would you say that they should do when they listen to this? What's the first thing that they should do, in your opinion, this week?
wow, great question. Um, I would say, and this isn't a prop just to Bricks and Bytes, but the first
I
two,
didn't intend for this. Whatever you're gonna
no,
say.
and I'm going to give it some wider context, right? It's easy for me because I've always had this interest in not just technology innovation, just how do we do it better, right? Is there a better way? I would really take the time to watch some podcasts or watch some YouTube short or well, let me start from the top here. If you listen and read about where AI is today and where it's going in another industry, I think that's going to help you frame how you need to think about our business
Mm,
because there's where the transformation has already happened, even pre, AI explosion. So for me, I'd go back to that again and just say, you really need to take the time as an executive leader to say, this is important for me to understand this new technology that's on the horizon. And you have to be willing to talk about it. This isn't a kid's game. This isn't the 25-year-old's responsibility. This is your responsibility as an executive to be educated enough about AI because it is directly affecting how you strategically think about your business, period.
very cool. Carl, thank you so much. Looking forward to following the journey. of
Yeah.
Big D's transformation.
Yeah. No, no, I appreciate it. Owen, and keep doing what you're doing. The industry needs more of this, and we're grateful to have platforms that are really, pushing us to rethink and bringing some great thinkers to the table. So, yeah, keep it up.
Keep going. Thank you.
Yeah.